Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not to Comic Book. This being a show we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Riverdale as well as the season premiere of Happy. Like always, if I'm talking about something that you want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below. I include the time when I start talking about each of the respective shows. So, for example, if you want to hear what I say about this week's episode of Riverdale, you can skip to what I say about the season premiere of Happy. But the first thing I'm going to talk about is this week's episode of Riverdale. So there are a lot of interesting things to break down about this episode. The competition between Jughead and his mom heats up even more. It's kind of interesting because it almost seems like to this point his mom doesn't even treat him like, it's like that's your son, but for her it's just like you're more like a threat, because it's like, oh yeah, don't get in my way again, grabbing on his head like that. Even with I'm skipping around and stuff like that, but even the whole situation of she knew Jughead wouldn't back away from the situation, and the gargoyles later on are equipped with guns. It's like your son could have died, but for her it's almost kind of like, yeah, this is about you and me, mano a mano. This isn't about anyone else and all that. And it's just kind of like, oh, don't involve Jelly Bean and your dad. Because a conversation comes up between Archie and Jughead about like, oh, what are you going to do about Jelly Bean if you do get Gladys out of town? But the thing is, like, once again, she's neck deep in this. Like, Jelly Bean has a much bigger, like, we haven't really talked about it since, like, because I brought it up before. It's like, it's not going to be that easy because she spent a lot of time with Gladys, so she kind of co-signs everything that Gladys does. She's fine with it. Because what I mean is, like, when she first got to town, it's like, what did Gladys say? It's like, oh yeah, you got your dad wrapped around your finger. So it's like, she's just as much a part of this. So, like, even if Jughead did what he did, like, Jelly Bean would get involved. Not unless Gladys is even lying to Jelly Bean. Maybe Jelly Bean thinks it's this and that, but she might not know the full scope of what her mom is doing. Once again, it's like, I have to stress it. You literally could have gotten your son killed, but I guess the whole point is he was never in any danger. The trigger was never going to actually be pulled on him. Maybe other people, just to kind of scare him off. It's like, oh, kill these other people around him and make him feel guilty about it. I mean, obviously, like, his dad gets pissed at him because it's like him and the serpents were busting other people out. Not out, down, like all these other gargoyles, And then, like, he messed up the bust and everything. And it's, Jughead's still caught in that position where he should tell his dad, but I think for him it's just like the collateral damage, the fallout of telling his dad the truth, of just like his dad, feels happy, like everything's working. And if it, Jughead doesn't want to be the one to take that all away, but now and the fact is that Gladys is telling him, like, oh no, make this us, makes me think like she is afraid that if he does learn the truth, it will screw everything up. Because I think that's her, like, I think she's kind of playing at Jughead's pride of him being the one to take her down to stop all this. I think that's what's keeping her, like, going, is trying to, like, push him into keeping this up. Obviously, there's going to be fallout to it, because I guess, like, Jughead's going to be the one to suffer the ramifications. I guess, well, lo and behold, I'm kind of skipping around, but I'll go ahead and talk about it. Like, Baby Teeth at the end got killed. And it's like, that's on Jughead for getting involved in all of this. But that's the thing, like, his mom is getting connected with all these gargoyles and stuff like that. There's something even more sinister with all that going on, that I think there's a game at play here that she's trying to take advantage of, but there's a much bigger thing Hiram had his whole situation with the Gargoyle King and stuff like that too, but Gladys might want to be careful before she gets swallowed up by this whole G&G thing, in a sense of she might find herself on the wrong end of this game. Maybe not. I don't know. It's definitely going to be interesting to see. But I think that might be the point. It's like, make Jughead realize, like, oh, someone you got involved in all of this is dead now, So, also that scene, because I think this episode's titled The Raid, which is kind of befitting in certain regards, because obviously it's like, oh, them raiding, the gargoyles, but also because I think you can probably also think of it like the Raid movies in a sense. But I thought it was pretty dope, all those different, like, floors, and, like, everyone's fighting, like, the gargoyles, whether it be the serpents or, like, the people from the juvie that Archie was at, including Mad Dog. I thought that was so dope. Like, them having each other's back like that, so awesome. I mean, it's kind of interesting because obviously that plays into what was brought up earlier in the episode about how, like, oh, like, the serpents need to be more aware of what's going on, kind of more fighting as a team. And it's like, they did, and they rocked it. I mean, sadly, Kurtz ended up getting away, but it shows you that they're willing to kind of do whatever, because Kurtz is like, oh, I'm ready to ascend, are you? And literally flings himself out the window. So, geez. But like I said, it was pretty dope, especially how they did the thing of kind of slowing it down a bit and then showing you the 3 different levels, like fighting on each level. I thought that was kind of really nicely done. It is sad to find out, though, the whole Mad Dog situation in the sense of Elio got to him, because for him it's like, yeah, his grandma and his brother are in a bad place, and it's like, no, I need to get them out of there. But it's like, you know, for Archie it's like, you can't trust Elio, but for Mad Dog it's like, dude, it's the best of all my options. It's the best one in front of me, so I have to take it because I got to look out for them. It's not about me. It's no matter what I have to do, it doesn't matter if it means I'm able to take care of them, you know. And for him, he tells Archie, it's like, I wouldn't even be here right now for you, so I'll always remember that, Red. I liked it, and I thought it was pretty dope that you know, he has the gym as being a place that they can set up. And obviously they were putting the fights and stuff like that, but this they can do a little more, obviously more freedom, and obviously not having fights bet on, but they can be, you know, hone their skills, but, you know, in a more positive sense, like Archie has. I mean, obviously with the exception of, you know, Mad Dog sadly flowing back into that realm in a certain regard. But I think we're probably going to see that kind of pick up more going forward, like Mad Dog being put in that situation. I mean, we saw what happened with Archie and stuff, like him being put in a fight where it's like he was supposed to lose. I mean, he thankfully ended up losing anyway, because who knows what would have happened if he'd actually won. That would have been an issue on his own. What I also thought was kind of neat was, like, this is like the first time we've really seen Veronica and Archie interact, subsequently since their breakup, and he actually went to her for help, the whole governor situation. I thought that was pretty dope. I think things were awkward for a while, but I think it's just a situation of they're both good, you know. And since I am bringing up Veronica, let's talk about the family situation. She's still trying to repair the relationship with her family, which, once again, because everyone admits, it's like, that's so weird you want to save your family's relationship, because the conversation came up, it's like, isn't that kind of a good I think it was Betty that was like, isn't that kind of a good thing? It's like, yeah, your parents cause a lot of damage when you're together, but in the long run, her main reason for wanting to keep them together is because for her, it's like, she was raised to believe family is everything, and for her, it's like, for her dad to just kind of give up on that marriage, it's almost like, so what was the whole point of, like, is that, you know, family is important, the most important thing in the world, is that complete and utter bullshit? That's something she's lived by entirely. So I think that's like why when she loves someone, she loves them with all her heart, you know. It's because of that, because it's like, oh yeah, you know, once you've made that connection with someone, like once you've built something with someone, it's forever type of thing. And so it's interesting too, because I never even thought about that. For Hermione, it's the whole situation of like, oh yeah, if they get divorced, it kind of makes her seem weak, just because it's like, oh, you don't have Hiram's protection anymore. And then obviously, like, we know that Hermione's made a lot of moves. I mean, to be granted, maybe she made a lot of moves on her own anyway, like even before she met Hiram, or just, you know, but obviously there's a lot of things she did on her own, not necessarily on her own, but on the behalf of Hiram. So there's a lot of people that would target her. It's kind of interesting and a little twisted that Veronica actually set it up to be like, oh yeah, sending a threat to her mom with basically, oh, you'll be sleeping with the fishes, you know, classic mobster move, and it ended up being her the entire time. Didn't see that coming. I was like, oh, it must be one of the enemies, because I figured it wasn't Hiram, but I never would have thought it was Veronica. But because in her mind, it's like, if I can get you guys together, you know, then y'all talk, and then you could fix everything, you know. Hiram is willing to kind of like, hey, keep up this public perception that, hey, everything's great, we're a family, because this way Hermione is protected, which I guess is kind of interesting considering the fact that it's like, yeah, she did try to kill you twice. So obviously, like, you could just let things kind of happen, but you didn't. I love the argument Veronica is making, though, of like, you're acting like this when you tried to kill Archie how many times? And then he's like, that's water under the bridge. She's like, you mean you tried to kill my boyfriend? It's water under the bridge. She's like, I literally chose you over him. And I was like, I guess I didn't really catch that, because she talks about the fact is, while you were lying in the hospital from your gunshot wound, instead of kind of taking Archie back, she focused more on the fact is of like, you know, Archie was kind of moving on, so she took the steps to, and I forgot, I'm sitting here now saying that, I was like, right, she made that decision because he was like, are things officially over at this point in time? Because for her, she was so focused, she wanted to focus more on family and stuff like that. She thought like, hey, my dad's in this condition, we need to be together as a family so he can, you know, recover and get better. So, and for her, it's like, I gave up love for you because I love you, Dad, you know. So it's like, I've made sacrifices for family, and you're just gonna give up on it. So that's definitely going to be interesting to see how that continues forward. That's going to be a little awkward around the dinner table and stuff like that, sure, but I'm curious to really see how that all unravels. Then there's the other aspect of this, and that's the whole farm situation, which obviously Betty's still doing her whole investigation situation. Side note, I did not realize this until this episode. Isn't he, because I didn't catch the name, I'll most likely catch it next episode, or I'll look it up afterwards. I'll probably wait till the next episode just so I can be like, okay, isn't that Chad Michael Murray that's playing Edgar? I think so. I always forget what show it is. Ain't it One Tree Hill he's from? Is that a WB show, or is that from a different channel? I feel like that was WB, but I don't remember. It's just kind of interesting, just because I think it's kind of like in the same lane of like, oh yeah, like obviously like the 90210 people. That whole, it's just one of those things of kind of like, oh yeah, like older, like, you know, drama, and seeing actors like that pop up on it again. You know, like Luke Perry and 90210, or like Manchin Amick from Twin Peaks. You get what I'm trying to say. It was just kind of interesting. I think that's him. Like I said, I could be wrong, but it's interesting that Cheryl ended up being kind of obviously the target of it, but I did not realize that, because I caught glimpses of previews. I thought, oh, they finally got Cheryl. I was like, no, Cheryl went undercover for Betty, because for her it's like Jason wanted to take Polly and the baby there, you know, to run away together there. It's like, maybe you should be wondering, why is that? And it's like, oh, right, they did it. I'd completely forgotten about that. I was like, right, because I knew they were going to run away together, but I'd completely forgotten it was like the farm. Maybe, I guess they mentioned it way back then, but I didn't remember that. But that's what motivated Cheryl to, you know, and Cheryl doing her thing and being the great actress that she is, like crying and getting Evelyn to drop her guard. Because obviously Evelyn knows that Betty's super against everything. So when it was time for the interview, she said that she's like, you know, are you for cults or something like that? And Betty was like, no. She's like, okay, that's the end of it. It's like, yeah, she had that question up there specifically because she knew that's how Betty felt. Like, she knew, she could already tell she wasn't going to change Betty's mind. So it's like, why kind of like even waste our time on this? Like, give you any ammunition you can use against us later on. Which is also sad, like the thing about like Betty being like, Mom, we haven't really talked, and that's all you got to say is like, you forsake me, Betty, not the other way around. It's like, still, you're mom and everything, but once again, that's just a whole complicated can of worms. But what was interesting is, obviously Cheryl kind of talked about a lot of stuff. Like, obviously the whole point was to kind of talk her truth, so that way it was more believable. What I am curious about, though, too, is why did Edgar take such a specific interest in Cheryl? Maybe it's just because she's from such a prominent family. Maybe it's because Cheryl is who Cheryl is, and it's like, if you can convert Cheryl, you can convert anyone. Because even Betty later on is like, wait, you want to go back? Why are you listening to Edgar? You literally never listen to anyone. I was like, I literally talked about that before. I was like, Cheryl is the most stubborn, borderline narcissistic person. I was like, I don't see her getting sucked into a cult. She, like I said, she's too stubborn for it. But it turns out she did. But lo and behold, it was kind of interesting hearing the conversation, because it's like, oh yeah, like, the whole situation at Sweetwater in season 1 when she fell into it, saw Jason's body, and it's like, oh, that's you know, being baptized, or when she burned down her home, was it Thistle House, and it's like, oh, you were born from fire. But it also turns out, well, for one, you know, Betty was able to get the recordings for Cheryl, Polly, and Alice. To be fair, later on, Edgar doesn't even, like, you know, he drops a lot of the pretenses because it's Betty. I think he figures if he can, like, I guess for him, he literally doesn't look at her as a threat. It's like, oh, you can't do anything. I have such control over these people. There's nothing you can do that would change that. The fact is that I think on some level, maybe you could also make the argument, like, for him, he knows that he's going to sway her at some point in time, so he doesn't have to worry about her ever. That's potentially another route with that. But it was interesting because it's like we find out what hold he has over these people, and it's like he can make them see the people that they care about. In Cheryl's case, it's like, because of him, like Edgar, I can see Jason again. I'm assuming maybe the same thing in Polly's case. In Alice's case, it's Charles, and so I'm assuming maybe in Kevin's case it could be Joaquin, or, you know, it could also be, well, because I'm assuming in Fang's case it might be, well, I was about to say, it could be Mitch, but then I was like, but that's kind of the point I was trying to make. We've already seen that they can make you hallucinate because Kevin saw Mitch, and that was the whole point of kind of breaking him down. Like, they can probably, like, make you see what they want you to see, and either, like, you know, you're on some hallucinogenic that's making you think it's super real. I mean, we've already seen that with everything G&G related, so obviously there is a through line there about like the hallucinogenics and stuff like that, of like making you see stuff, kind of, you know, obviously in the case of G&G it's more like playing into your fears, whereas, you know, the farm situation is more so playing into your hopes and dreams in the sense of like playing into what you've lost, you know. So that's interesting. That's immediately where my mind goes, because like I said, we saw it last episode where like Kevin, immediately after Evelyn gave him something to eat, he was like, oh, he saw Midge. So it's like, okay, so, but it is interesting at the end though, we have Betty confronting Edgar and being like, tell me everything. So maybe next episode we'll get a full history of the farm, where it started, what it's all about. I'm curious to see what's going to be at the end of that conversation. Once again, like, I think we'll see like where Edgar stands. Is it because he thinks he can convert Betty, or does he just not look at her as a threat just because his hold over people is that strong? I feel like the strongest person is Evelyn, which is funny when you actually think about it in a sense, just because the actress who plays Evelyn, because I brought it up before, she was in Orphan Black. I'm blanking on her character's name. It was like Grace or something, wasn't it? Or Gracie. She was kind of part of a cult back in season 2, so it's just kind of interesting, like, she's playing a character that's kind of in another cult, kind of raised in a cult to be exact too. So it's kind of interesting when you really sit there and think about it in a certain extent. And I just thought that was just kind of interesting thought that kind of flooded my head. So, but I'm very interested to see where all this takes us going forward into the next episode, especially, you know, after the whole situation with Baby Teeth, because that's probably going to push FP to be a lot stricter on Jughead. He might even like cancel this whole like deputy program and stuff like that, just because it's like, yeah, like, once again, it's like that could have been you, because it didn't seem like the normal means, because like the fact is they went out of it, well, to be fair, it was part of the game, but was to take one of his teeth, but it looked like his ear was bleeding. It's not the typical poisoning. So now that I'm sitting here thinking about it, it seems like most likely that probably was, I'm assuming, Gladys behind that. But the thing is, to go after Baby T specifically, well, I guess it might not have just been him specifically. Well, it was about like a baby cub, like a wolf cub or something like that. So I guess, you know, he was kind of like the youngest of them, I'm assuming. But it's like, to know that makes me go, I don't know. Like, would Gladys know that, or would it be someone else that would know that? I don't know. It was just kind of interesting, because I was just starting to think, because the way his ears were bleeding like that, I was like, maybe Gladys faked it like that to make it seem like it was a G&G thing, when it was her just kind of sending a message to Jughead in that route. Maybe not, we'll see. Another thing to also think about too is, I mean, because obviously it played a part in this episode, was the fact is that Hiram is opening his prison, so it's definitely going to be interesting to see where things kind of go from there as well, you know. And now moving on to the season premiere of Happy, a great season premiere. A crazy way to start off the season with exploding nuns. A lot of interesting things, like that ended up being an interesting thing, because it's like, okay, so what's this all about? And I guess initially all the nuns were like, oh, we're going to stay here, we're all going to die together. This way no one has to sacrifice anyone. But then there's that one nun, and then they all fight to try and find the egg that has the device that basically kills all the other nuns except for one. What's interesting, though, is obviously this is our introduction to what I'm assuming is our main antagonist for this season in certain regards, and that is Bunny. We'll call him that, which is interesting because it ends up being Smoothie. I had a feeling, just like the whole torture thing, it's like, because I mean, it's on some like Saw level stuff, but then in retrospect, I was like, oh yeah, that kind of does fit Smoothie. It is him, because at first I was like, is it Sunshine? And it's like, nope, he just pops up like that. Because the question is, like, is he still doing, because, you know, I'm not too surprised. I was wondering, because, like, it's like, yeah, apparently he's still doing the whole bug situation, because Blue had that bug, like, squirm out his, like, pants or whatever. I'm assuming that was up his ass. I don't know. But, yeah, that whole situation is like, oh yeah, this is a gift from Bug. So it's like, yeah, Sunshine's doing that whole thing, which I guess that's just kind of his thing. So we're not going to ever really explain why that's his thing, while he also does the whole sunshiny thing. Nevertheless, sunny shine situation, but nevertheless, getting back to what I was bringing up before. It also makes sense too why his eyes kind of red, because it's like, oh yeah, that's from him getting shot by Meredith. I thought it was kind of interesting because like Sunshine was kind of like, oh, like, you know, maybe I should have just, you know, straight up killed them, Meredith and Nick. But, you know, you have him being like, oh, like, I don't have a revenge bone in my body. But it's like, you do. Like, you've already shown last season that you can be vindictive. It's interesting. I mean, to be fair, like, Meredith did kind of screw you over like that. And so did Nick, especially when you were trying to do your thing to Nick last episode. That didn't go down the way you wanted it to. But it did seem like he was posted outside of Amanda and Haley's place, but I guess that was like him because maybe he's trying to get to Nick like that. Maybe that's what that's stemming to. Who knows? I'll chalk it up to that, at least for now. But I'm interested to see what, like, beyond just torturing people, like, is it specific people or what? Because obviously last season Santa had his reasoning for, you know, specific targets. It was kids. That was the whole reasoning. But it's like, is his torture just Smoothie's whole thing, or is it just kind of like a specific reason? Because even, you know, because it's like obviously like Sunshine is hiring him to do it. Well, to be fair, I did forget, like, Shine did the whole like pitch to the Pope about like revamping Easter, make Easter great again for the first time. So that, I guess that's what that all is. It's supposed to put, you know, like Easter on the map in a certain way, I guess. Maybe so Easter gets the same play that, you know, holidays like Christmas does. So I guess that's connected to it in a psychopathic way. I thought the whole point was just to put it on a map, but I guess like even, well, because the whole thing is like, oh yeah, look at these nun situation that made head, you know, frontline news, and it's like, of course, it's like, oh, look at this. So even any negative stuff, I guess, can still be looked at as, you know, even bad publicity is still good publicity. I guess it's kind of, you know, the whole mentality on that. So I guess that's Smoothie's whole thing. Which I'm curious also, like, is Smoothie's thing going to be like, oh, I'm Smoothie being Bunny, or is it just going to be like, oh, Bunny and Smoothie are different people? Like, it seems like he works on a more elaborate scale now that he's Bunny. Like like I said, that's almost like Saw level stuff. Like, he was all torture porn and shit last season, but not nearly to the extent. And now I'm sitting here thinking about it. It's like, right, Haley was one of the people that stood up to him last season, and I'm sure he didn't really appreciate that. I'm guessing that's another knock against Haley, but I'm sure it's mainly because it's like, oh yeah, you're Nick's family, so that kind of puts you in Nick's crosshairs. But nevertheless, that was pretty neat that obviously we see Nick trying to change. There's that whole, really quickly, that thing about Happy changing. He's got like hair on in his armpits. I'm like, is that supposed to be representative of what Happy brought up last season of like, oh, you don't want an imaginary friend to stick around too long, things start getting weird? Is that what that is? I mean, it seemed like he came to Nick because like Nick needed him, but is it a situation of like, no, he's just making an excuse to stick around, you know, because he can also, this way he can also be around Haley too. Obviously, maybe there's some truth to it, but maybe he is sticking around longer than he's necessarily supposed to. Maybe that was all BS when he said that. He just wanted using it as an excuse to stay around Nick and Haley. But maybe that's like something's going to happen to him. Maybe he's transforming, or maybe it's supposed to represent the fact is that he is growing and changing. Maybe we'll see like Happy 2.0 this season, you know, of like him maybe getting like a deeper voice, or, you know, kind of going through puberty or something like that. Maybe, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see if that ends up being what that is. Maybe it could be like, the fact is like, obviously Happy's always looked the way he has because he's always been Haley's imaginary friend. But there was a thing that they kind of repeated at the beginning of this episode, but they also said it last season, was like, oh, I don't want to know what your imaginary friend would look like. You know, we was referring to Nick, but now that Happy is Nick's imaginary friend, because he's kind of got like the sadistic thoughts that he does, maybe that's slowly but surely morphing Happy into a different form, because like obviously that the people in the bites got on his nerves, so he like in his mind is like, oh, I hit him with laser vision, the other ones I just stood there with a chainsaw and chopped their heads off. He's trying not to drink. I love him and Happy celebrating anytime it's like, yo, we settled this. Talking about like when they were talking to Haley's teacher and everything. It's like everything she's been through. It's like, yeah, took care of that. Him and Happy fist bumped and everything, celebrating it. And you just have Haley being so mortified. It's like, oh, this is my dad. Obviously, he's still in the early stages. Because I think based on what it was saying, I mean, not listed time frame is different. Because it did seem like it was saying 2-month period, but that could have been them referencing something else. But I'm assuming it's only been like 2 months since season 1. I mean, in time frame wise, like obviously outside of the show, it would make sense, but obviously within the show, it would make sense just because it's like going from Christmas to Easter, you know. So, but nevertheless, well, you'd have to go more than 2 months, but you get what I'm trying to say. Like I said, the time frame might be bigger, and I just because I caught 2 months at one point in time, but that might have been in referencing something else. But I do appreciate the fact is that Nick is, you know, trying to do the fatherhood thing of like, oh yeah, Haley's been doing this stuff. It's like, what? Show me the concrete proof. And the teacher's like, we have like literal like HD evidence of this. And he's just talking about the fact is like, you know what the most deplorable thing that really just brings me to my knees? If you let your hair down and put on some makeup, you'd be pretty okay to go, you know? I was like, oh God. And then Haley's like, dude, I did it. Everything, the psychological damage to people, the broken window, that was like on me. So it's interesting too because we also found out about, I don't think that was ever mentioned last season about what Amanda does for a living. It's like, oh, it seems like she works at a dental office, which is interesting. And obviously it's like, oh, Sunny Shine's on the TV and she's kind of got a PTSD thing going on because she's like, yeah, could you not watch that? It's like the doctor being like, oh, everyone loves Sunshine. It's like, yeah, not Amanda. Because it seems like she hasn't told Haley the truth about it, or at the very least it's probably a situation where it's like, oh, anytime Sunshine comes up she kind of changes the subject. It might be something where Haley might just inadvertently kind of turn her eye away from it just because like it was connected to her being kidnapped by Santa last season, so maybe it just kind of leaves a bad taste in her mouth in that regard, so maybe she just naturally kind of gravitated away from it, but we'll see. It's interesting to find out that Meredith is now a realtor essentially because she got kicked off the force because when Blue got arrested, basically IA was like, oh yeah, Meredith's the only dirty cop, which even though literally half the force is on Blue's payroll. That was interesting. Which I'm also interested, I find it so surprising that we got the IA agents again. Like they were only in one episode last season. I'm curious, is that going to be a thing or will we see them kind of pop up more and more throughout the season? Because they were questioning the nun lady, and I thought it was kind of interesting too for her. It's kind of like she made up the lie. I guess it was to make herself feel better, being like, they said when it's all said and done, like the Bunny said that, oh, like those nearest would kind of blow up, but everyone else, like the one person would blow up, but everyone would be safe. But the IA just like, oh, it's funny how the complete opposite happened. So, which obviously she knew that was going to happen. It was just kind of like the whole point is like kind of like a survival of the fittest type of situation. But getting back to it, I'm also curious, like, you know, speaking of Meredith, like where her and Nick necessarily stand. Obviously, like Nick is making things work between him and Amanda and Haley, but I don't know if that's like on a dating sense or just kind of like a, obviously still in the process of figuring things out, but still. It does bring up this whole conversation of like, obviously, do you go after Sunshine? Doesn't matter, he's rich and powerful, but also he's a cockroach. You can take out that cockroach, there's going to be a whole bunch of other cockroaches, which is just funny considering the fact is he's, you know, the whole Mr. Bug situation, so it's kind of very befitting. But obviously we see at the end Meredith hasn't given up. To be fair, it's like she made a promise that, you know, he would get taken down, plus he's kind of the reason why so much stuff got set in motion. He was behind the Santa, he was behind Smoothie, which he still is with the whole Bunny situation, but he was also behind Blue, and that, like, everything that meant, all of that, which, what it meant for Meredith with her mom and everything. So obviously it's still kind of a personal thing for her. So I love that Nick also does that whole situation where he gets his prostitute friend from season 1, which even she's like, friend, he's like, okay, you know, 15%, 20%, and it's like, okay, fine, 10%. But I love, she's like, come on, Nick, you gotta leave because you're making things weird. He's like, I'm literally looking at this scene, you're telling me this isn't weird, and I'm the one making things weird. Never found out who that dude was that was getting that was potentially going to take her organs. Or organ or organs. I guess it doesn't really matter. I guess he's just some rich dude, or maybe they'll kind of circle back around to be something significant. But Nick shows up and accidentally kills everyone. That's sad. You're literally trying not to kill everyone and you end up doing it. The guy rushes you, ends up on a forklift. You pull him off, and then an absorbent amount of blood. I mean, that was a crazy amount of blood. It'd be twisted if you end up finding out that was actually a realistic amount of human blood. I know there's quite a bit of blood. Isn't it like 5 pints of blood in the human body? Maybe that probably balances out. It just looked extra blood, I guess, just because it kept gushing out like from a hose or something. And then, like, while Nick was kind of avoiding that other guy, he was like, they were slipping and sliding all over blood. I was like, this is so twisted and morbid. One dude gets crushed. The other dude gets accidentally hung and his neck snapped. It's like, geez, like Happy said, it's like, dude, you killed everyone. And then he also taking advantage of the situation. It's like, oh, how much for these organs? It's like, oh, I could get that much. He's like, oh, it needs to be, oh, look at all these body parts laying about. So it's like, hey, I can make the cash I need to pay for Haley to go to a private school. It looked like it was like a, which I guess that's going to be the tie-in with everything, because it seems like it was like a church school that she was going to, kind of like a Sunday school type of thing, but more like it was like a private religious school. It looked like Christian school, which obviously is going to tie into the Vatican, which is going to tie into Sunnyshine, which is going to tie into Bunny and all of that. So I do appreciate, going back to all those people Nick accidentally killed, that he was trying to take what Haley's teacher had told him about, you know, trying to discuss and then compromise, but it just all ended in failure for Nick. And then there's also the whole Blue situation. Can't let that slip my mind. I thought it was kind of interesting because it seemed like we came back and it's like, oh, Blue seems like he's more in control. Turns out, apparently, this is like a death god inside of him. I think the lady said August, and I love Isabel being there explaining. It's like, oh, this had nothing to do with a password. It's a thing that's been passed down from Scaramucci to Scaramucci for generations. The Don passed it on to Mikey, and Mikey passed it on to you, which is interesting. I mean, I guess it being a god and everything, death wouldn't stop it. So, which is interesting. And the lady ends up killing Isabella. I mean, at least she looks pretty dead. I mean, she could be okay, but like the fact that the lady was laughing and stuff like that makes me go, oh, Isabella probably dead, which is sad. But I guess you can make some remark of like, hey, at least she's with her boys. But now that thing's stuck inside of Blue, I wonder what specifically tied it to the Scaramucci bloodline. Well, I guess because I think that confirms something I had wondered about last season. I was like, did Blue's wife and son die when he blew up that car? Like, the explosion looked pretty damn big. It probably blew up the entire house. That was kind of my thought, but I wasn't 100% sure. The fact is that Isabella was the last of Scaramucci's. Kind of seems like that answers that. Not unless Blue has some illegitimate children out there or something like that. So I guess that could play a role in that, you know? But either way, I'm very interested to learn more about this thing, like what its plans are and stuff like that. Because there was the whole thing of like, once it enters Blue, that was supposed to be like maybe the end all be all for it. But to be fair, like for whatever reason, the soul transfer didn't go through all the way. Maybe it's because Mikey had died and it kind of screwed things up when the transfer tried to go through at the end of season 1. Or, you know, something else to it. I forgot to talk about this earlier. I'll quickly add it. I thought it was kind of pretty dope when you actually get to see like all the kids and like their imaginary friends, because obviously that was a little bit of an angle we saw a little bit last season, like other imaginary friends, but to see imaginary friends with their kids and stuff like that. And I love like one imaginary friend walks by and looks at Nick and is like, oh, what happened to your kid? And then Happy was like, what happened to your face? And that's something I also want to comment on. The fact is that Happy, I love that you can definitely see the influences of like, oh yeah, a lot of stuff that him and Nick went through last season is really there for him. And the fact is that he is acting a lot more like Nick. He's still a little bit of himself, but he still has a lot of Nick's attributes when it comes to himself, especially like the way he acts and a lot of the stuff that he says, like the whole like, oh, your face type of situation, you know. So it's interesting. But I got off track a little bit. But getting back to what I was, bringing up before, like I said, I'm curious to learn more about, like I said, I think his name is August. I'm curious to learn more about this thing, like where it came from, and once again, why it's in the Scaramucci bloodline. What does it plan to do? Can it even do anything now that Blue's in jail? Also, what kind of effect will this have on Mr. Bug / Sunnyshine and everything connected to Bunny / Smoothie? So many questions already. What's also an interesting thing I think that should be noted is the fact is that Haley obviously is having nightmares. Obviously, you can make the point that like, oh, it's PTSD, but she brings up the fact is that she doesn't remember her nightmares, which makes you go, huh. I mean, obviously, it's just kind of interesting because obviously Blue's having his whole nightmare situation too, but obviously it's probably unrelated. Or maybe not. Who knows? Maybe it has something to do with the fact that she doesn't have Happy anymore. I'm sure it's more of a PTSD situation, but it's definitely going to be interesting to see what ends up happening with all that, because obviously Nick's going to be balancing that with, because I saw the trailers, but a lot of everything I saw from the trailer was very just like out of order, so I don't know really what to expect from the season in the sense of like a story of like I said, even what the main antagonist would be. Now I'm sitting here thinking about, because I said it was Bunny, but I'm sitting here thinking it's probably the thing inside of Blue. What else is that thing capable of? It's just like, it seems like it's just a human at this point in time. Like, does it have any special abilities? Because obviously there's devils in this world and stuff like that. So will there be more things like it or demons and stuff like that popping up? We'll ultimately have to wait and see what the next episode has in store for us. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about today. Some of me, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good